The following content has been provided by RWTH, Aachen University.
Welcome to the first lecture, iOS application development, and I want to quick introduce myself. It's me, Simon. I'm deputy head of the media computing group, so I'm a postdoc here, and I'm teaching this class for a couple of years now. And this is Philipp. He's my research assistant or teaching assistant in this case, and we will do the lecture together. So he will give a couple of lectures, and later on in the seminars and the practical part, we will do everything together. So we basically give the lectures together. So, and interestingly, last year we are also certified Apple trainers. So we are actually got a certificate from Apple to teach you how to use Swift. I'm not sure if this is any helpful. But we're allowed to do that now, officially from Apple, whatever this is. So we plan to give you a certificate for that, but it's probably, we tried that last year, but it didn't work out. So we will try this year again to get something from Apple that we teach you, but I cannot promise you anything. So yeah, we will try. Let's say it like this. Okay, a little bit about us, why we give this course. So we started out giving this course first time, I think 7 years ago or something. No, 9 years ago, actually. It's 2018 already, okay. And since then, we developed a lot with iOS applications for a long time. We have a lot of projects. Here's a couple of examples. So for one example is you can download the app, the Flap, which is a tourist guide through the city of Aachen. Philipp is one of the main developers for this one. And there's an augmented reality tourist guide that you can just download. And you've probably seen this logo somewhere in the city, these little spots on the voice where you can use to show you a little bit about the university. Something in front of the main building of the Super C is one, and also in the city center. So actually these spots. So you can, if you want to try it out, just download it and check it out. We also have, we did several years ago, a tourist guide for the city. So if you ever go to the city hall or the Centre Charlemagne, the museum in the city center, you can have a tourist guide, which is also developed by us. So we have a lot of experience developing applications for iOS. We also had an augmented audio guide in a town hall. Is that still operational? No, it's not operational. So, but I will show you later on, maybe a demo. We can walk around and see or hear people talking like an old medieval environment. Okay. So, and what we are doing now is basically doing a lot of research with mobile applications. For example, this one here is using augmented reality to draw and to create 3D geometry using a specific pen. And we will show you later on how this works. And we'll probably do 1 or 2 projects in this area. So you will do that in this course as well to develop AR applications. And also we do a lot of things with tangible objects on tablets and stuff like these things. So the class goal is basically to, first of all, to not only get an understanding how iOS works, but also to get a feeling what is the difference between developing an application for the desktop environment, which you're probably quite used to, and what is the difference in mobile, what there are different things that you have to think about. And we will focus a lot on design and about these differences, and we'll teach you a little bit about these things as well. Then we also have a deep look at the software frameworks, which later on we will give you a quick introduction about how you start programming so you can use directly program, but also dive into a lot of deep topics like AR and a lot of these frameworks. And then we talk a little bit about also establishing software engineering patterns, but we will cover that very briefly. If you want to learn something about software patterns and software engineering, go to a different chair. That's not our expertise, but we can talk a lot about how Apple uses specific software patterns to how this. So this lecture will be a lot about administrational stuff. So this course is a little bit different than the usual course. What we do, we split this course in 3 parts basically. We have a couple of lectures which I will give or Philipp will give, which is roughly 10 lectures. We do every week 2, so we don't have a lab in the first couple of weeks. We just do 2 lectures every week, roughly 10 lectures. We not clearly decided we do 9 or 10, depends on the content, where we teach you the basics. So you can do how to use Swift, how to create your first application and dive into a little bit into ARKit. and a little bit table view controllers and stuff like these things. And then we will hand out, or we will do that directly next week, we will hand out you presentations, so you have to actually dive into one of these topics. For example, we had last year core graphics or stuff like these things, a specific framework where you as a group of 3 have to give a presentation about this. You have to dive into this topic, understand it, write an example application, and teach the others in the class what you learned about this so that the others can actually use it. So in this case, you have to give a presentation about 20 minutes where you explain, okay, what is this specific framework used for and how can the others use it. So this is a way that we can cover a lot of different topics. Otherwise, it's quite impossible to cover the entire iOS framework because it got really, really huge over the years. And then at the end, we will do a group project, also with group of 3, where you get a specific application that you need to develop. We're not entirely sure what we're going to do. It's probably somewhere in the ARKit environment, but a little bit depends on how many devices we can get, so we can actually give you access to these devices. And this is the course plan here. So the normal lectures are right now from 10:30 to 12, but also on Monday from 2:30 to 4 p.m. And we will, as the first time, we will do lectures at both things at the same time. So make sure that you have time. The problem is we are very limited in seats because we cannot give unlimited time for every seminar. That's why we have this weird number of 36 seats, because we only have a certain time where we can give you certain things, and we don't want to increase the groups for the seminar so big, so we have give a presentation with 5 people is quite useless. So we said we want to have 3, so that's why we only have 30 seats. And this worked out quite well last time. It's also very good for the projects because then we have a lot of time for each of the projects to give you feedback for these things, and we have like 100 students. We too will not be able to do that. Yes?
When are we going to know if we get a seat?
I will tell you that. That's also on the slide. About the grading, it's 6 credits you will get, and you will get 17% for the presentation, for the seminar, then 50% for the project, and we have an oral exam at the end. I will talk about these. I have this on the slide, so I'll show you all later. What we do, in a lecture, we introduce Swift 4, which is the latest Swift version, which is available from Apple. We'll do a lot of Xcode explanation because if you first see Xcode, it's a little bit overwhelming. Who of you used Xcode before? Oh, okay, a couple of people. Okay, so we have to see how much we go. And then we go over through these things. And we actually follow a book from Apple, which is this app developer for Swift. You can get it in Apple Books, and that's the name now. They called iBooks before. You can download it for free. It's an ebook, which is very detailed, so you can actually go through the book. And we will cover this book mostly in these first 10 lectures. It is actually planned for 1-year course, but we made it last time in 9 lectures. Since you're computer scientists, we can skip a lot of things. So this is basically, if you want to read something up that we do in the lecture, you can also have a look at the books here. So a little bit more detail about the seminar presentation. So as I already said, groups of 3, so we have 12 groups. 20-minute presentation where you present an overview of a specific framework, where you have to provide an example application, so you have to really program something for this thing. And we will record this, if you agree on that. We'll record this and make it available for the other students so they can actually have a look back at these things. However, we will not put that online somewhere just for this course in particular. And as I said, 70% of your final grade will be this presentation and what you submit at the end. But we'll talk about this then later on. Possible topics are, as we covered a couple of, we're not entirely sure which we were going to choose, but these are the ones that we chose last time, except series shortcuts, which is quite new. But these are just to give you a hint what we will do. So for example, we had last time a MapKit group where they explained how to use navigation, how to create a navigation thing, all these in these details. And there are some more which are a little bit more complicated. For example, metal is usually a little bit more challenging, which is why it's not on there. But if you are interested in that, we're always happy to have someone dig into that. So The projects are also groups of 3, and what we want to have from you is not like something that is quite usable, but what we want to have a really submittable app. So we want to go the whole process of developing the app, testing the app, and if you something that we will not submit it to the App Store. If you want, you could, but something that could be submitted to the App Store, so you can actually have the entire process. And at the end, you have to do a presentation of this thing. So you have to give a presentation in your group, showing a live demo of your system, and talk a little bit about what you did there and what the challenges are. And we will have a look at your code at the end, and this is why code documentation is really important. It will be part of your grade if you can document your code. If we just cannot read your code, we will deduct points from this one. So, and this is basically the major part of this entire class, that you will get 50% of your grade from this thing. Possible topics is usually games or productive apps, but we are not decided on yet entirely, so we will see how it works out. The oral exam is an exam at the end, which will be about 50 minutes per person. So we have 1 day scheduled. I already scheduled a day, I think on 9th of February, but it's already should be visible in RWTH Online. I hope. I'm not sure. So we will see. And what we do there, we will ask you questions about the first 10 lectures, but we will ask you also questions from the seminars, but not only your seminars, but also from the others. So you have to be here to see what they are. And we will talk, we will ask you questions about your particular project. So that's what we usually look at your code and maybe ask you questions about a specific part in your code that you wrote. But at least we did that last time. It would be very similar in this case. Yeah, and this will be the rest of the grade. Requirements is you should know what object-oriented programming is. We will not do the basics, but I hope you all should know what it is. You should have an Apple ID, which you can just get as a developer. It's not that important anymore, but you will see you will need. The other thing, if you have a Mac or an iOS device, it's pretty helpful because there is a lab here downstairs in the basement, which you can use, but only like during the normal office hours. However, iOS devices is a very limited resources. We will try to get a lot of them, but we only have a couple of them now. And the last thing, you have to register to RWTH Online. I know there's an issue for SSE students and for Erasmus students, which we are currently trying to solve, but what we will do after the lectures, just come talk to us and we will register for you so that you are in the process, in the selection process. So we can actually register you, but you can't, and I don't know why. This is the typical situation which will happen a lot in this semester because RWTH Online is as new as for us as for you, so we don't know what the system will work as. There are some issues there. The same thing is true for the registration for the exam. You also have to register for the exam. How this works, I have no idea yet. I see that there's an exam, but I have no idea how the registration process is. And I'm not alone with that. So as soon as we know about these things, we will tell you. And probably this semester registration will be like quite open for that. Yes?
I would suppose since the exam registration only starts in December, maybe it's just not implemented yet.
I fear that, yes. Yeah, so I can already see the exams and stuff, but I don't know how to put students in there. So maybe it's really not implemented yet. That's the usual answer that you get from the central administration about these things. Okay, so just an overview of the administrational stuff, lectures, seminars, and project, and the grading exam. So, and what we do, we were recording every lecture. So right now I'm just doing a screen recording. So we'll put these lectures somewhere online. We don't know yet where, because we usually put them on iTunes U, but Apple changed that last year, and we had a lot of issues with that. And the university didn't decide yet. They want to have a new system, but since RWTH Online is now out there, they have something else to do. So the university didn't decide where to put that generally. So we probably put that somewhere where you can download it, maybe on our servers or something like that, but we make it available in some way. Let's see if the new Moodle allows us to do that. I'm not sure. Yeah. We are one of the few classes this year who are not using L2P, because we are one of the test users for the new Moodle system, which you maybe heard of. Yeah, he's like, do you have bad experience with it?
Maybe.
Shit. So, since we are just uploading slides and videos, we can, if it doesn't work, we will just put them on our servers. So you will get the content anyways, but we have to learn this as well, because they will change it next year as well. So let's see. It will be a lot of fun this semester. All right, so why do you take this class? So what we are usually doing, we are not software developers at any point. We are usually HCI experts. So what we are doing is we are mostly interested in how users interact with an interactive system. So we don't care really about the deep parts of the system, but we are more interested in how the interface should look like and how the interface should behave that users can actually work with it. This will be also part of this lecture. We will cover a lot of software and coding stuff, but we also, especially in the projects later on, we cover a lot about the interface, because that's the most interesting part for us. If you want to do software engineering, go to a different chair. But we will do a lot of like what kind of application you're writing, how can you actually help with your application certain user, how can you achieve a certain goal, or is your application actually useful for the task that you want to do. So we will focus a lot of these things about the interface environments and how users will interact with that. Yeah, we also have a couple of other lectures regarding this. We have DIS1. Is someone of you take this? Okay, who of you did already take DIS1 the last years? Okay, a couple. Who is planning to take this semester? Okay, also a couple ones. Yeah, so if you're interested, that's basically the more research HCI part, but we're doing a little bit more programming. Yeah, we updated to iOS 12, obviously, and we updated to Swift 4 because Swift 5 is still in alpha or beta phase, I'm not sure. So we will stick to the stable version right now because they didn't release anything new yet. Is there any questions about administrational things? Anything? Not yet. So, okay, so we'll start a little bit by talking about the developing for mobile applications. So the difference between developing something for mobile environments and for desktop is that the environment is very, very different, and you're not always sitting at the table, but you're on your way, and there are a lot of different devices. I mean, if you have like a laptop in front of you, it's a rectangle device, you have a lot of screen space. But as example, if you want to develop something for iOS environments, you already have in the iOS family a lot of different devices with different screen sizes and different purposes. For example, if you develop something for the iWatch, it will be a totally different app than from the iPad because you use it entirely different. So you have to think about these things, and you have to think about when you want to use these things and how you're going to use these things. But however, they have some things in common, and that's usually they have some kind of limited screen space. For the watch, it's very, very limited, but for the iPad, it's still, I mean, 12 inches, the largest one, it's still not that big compared to your 30-inch screen on your screen. And usually what you have one interface at your screen. So you don't have multiple apps running at the same time. You have it in the background, but compared to desktop environment, you can have two Windows at the same time, but you don't really have something like Windows on your iOS device. So what you usually have is like one screen. We'll talk a little bit about the iPad, which broke that up a little bit over the last years. But you will have usually one app only open. If you check your bus station, you don't have any other app open. So you have to think about these things when you design these things, that you have a lot of context switches. Since you're using touchscreen, you usually have very limited help. So you don't have a lot of you don't have a hover option that we have with a mouse. If you hover over an object, you usually get on a desktop environment some help. Yeah, how would you do that with touch? As soon as you touch it, something happens usually. So it's a little bit more difficult. But also in mobile devices, the context is the key. So you're using it in a little different context. So for example, if you look for a bus or something, you are in a totally different context if you want to write an email or something on your application. So you have to think about if I write an application, in which kind of context is this used? And these contexts could be huge. These contexts could be something like If you have an audio player, it should be run all the time in the background. If you have just a weather app, it should be just give me one screen of showing me the weather where I am, or maybe I can switch between different places, but this is a totally different environment. But you also have to think about what could happen when people interact with your mobile phone. So for example, it's very unlikely that you get hit by a bus when you're on your desktop things, but that happened like at the first parts of the people started using mobile devices. There are a lot of funny videos by people falling into like in the water or something like this, because people are focused on that. And you always have to think about when you create your interface that something could happen that people immediately stop using that. Maybe they get something, this context is around. So, and here's a little bit the crossover to DIS1, where we want to teach you a little bit about how to create an interface that makes it easy to use and how it makes it easy to understand. And here, 10 golden rules, which are some key functions. We will get back to that over the years, over the next couple of lectures, to just give you a hint how you can, what kind of rules you should follow when you design something. First of all, the most simple thing is, keep it interface simple. So don't clutter everything, create hundreds of buttons and stuff like these things, have text on this. Speak the user's language, so don't come up with weird error messages like the typical Windows 95 error of 25, but speak the user's language if something goes wrong. Tell them, for example, that your GPS is not working for some reason and not say, I cannot work. So be consistent and predictable. So if you create a new context, if you create, for example, this new window, don't show something totally random that the people are totally confused something. Provide feedback. So for example, if you load something from the web, show that in any way. Don't say, okay, my mobile phone is not doing anything. So these things. Minimize memory load. So that's not for the system. We don't care. But minimize memory load for the user. So make sure that people don't have to remember, okay, I have to press this button, this button, this button, and then I have to do some kind of 5-finger swipe gesture, drawing something. So touchscreens are very capable of detecting multiple touches at the same time, but at the same time, if you create a complex gesture by drawing something, nobody knows what the gesture is looking like. So make it simple or even help them. Avoid errors. It's a easy one. So try to avoid these things. Help to recover. So tell the user what they can do to make it work. For example, if you connect something, your Bluetooth is disabled, don't tell them I cannot do anything. Tell them enable Bluetooth or something like this. Design clear, closed dialogue. So make sure that the users, especially in mobile environments, always are able to quit your application or change it to a different one, because it could happen that somebody calls you and your application is then gone. Include help and documentation. So give them a hint. So something like, here you can read this. But also on the other side, offer shortcuts at some point. For example, if you know 3D Touch, this is a shortcut for expert users, because people are not always novice users for an application, but they will get faster. And if you always have a sequel which takes a long time, expert user will get annoyed and they want to have a short way to do that. That's similar to shortcuts on your keyboard, but it's a little bit more difficult. And the last thing that we usually add is a higher graphical designer, because the most computer science, I'm not, or at least me, we are not graphics designers, and we start drawing stuff, it gets weird. Maybe some of you are really good graphics designers, just saying that, but typical computer science people say, I can do everything. I will do the graphics, I will do the accounting and everything, but that's usually not the case. So if you create an application, make sure that you don't do the weird RGB color thingies. So this is always something that we do. So what I will do now is talk a little bit about example applications, what is out there. So one of the interesting applications, so you usually have these standard applications, but you also have like some immersive things. And one of these things is Osmose HD. It's a very old application. Do you still remember when it was? It's one of the first iPad applications ever. So, and it's basically a little game where you can play Osmosis. And what they did, they let you play around with that, and they usually you don't have any help, so you don't know what to do. and they just implemented a very simple 2D touch environment in this case. So they showed even in these applications you can create feedback. They had this little logo, which is usually there, so to help these things. So this is an example for getting something. Another example is how to use the limited screen space. That's typical application. Usually when you see, when you compare an application from the desktop to the mobile environment, you see on desktop you have multiple layers and stuff like these things. But in an app, you have everything on one screen, so you have a lot of different views. This has the benefit that you save a lot of screen space. You don't have the different nodes in this case. However, this also is a little bit difficult because people lose the focus of which kind of nodes I am in. So you have to think about these things as well, because this is an example for limited screen space. So the iPhone or the iOS applications are usually app-centric environments. So you have basically one app for one task. So you don't have these gigantic app that can do everything. Let's say you don't have the Excel spreadsheet thingy for your iOS application where you can do a lot of things. You usually have one app that does one particular task. And if you have a good app that does just this one particular task very well, for example, the weather app on the iPhone is just showing you the weather, nothing else. It does not give you stock information or something like this, but it just gives you a weather app. And this is also the concept of Apple, that they say you have one particular app for one particular task, and you just have a lot of different apps that are somewhat independent of each other. So, and a good app usually defines, okay, what can the user do with this app in particular very well. Usually it's one or two major things. For example, a bus app should show you when the bus is coming and not show you something else that is not important. It can have additional features, but it should do one thing right, and just this one thing. So if you design an app, focus on what do I want to do with this app and make this one thing really, really work well. Because otherwise people will instantly delete your app and will download one of the 1,000 different apps that can do exactly the same thing. That's usually the problem for developers in mobile applications. There are thousands of different apps that do very similar things. And there are studies showing that people are not very willing to try out mobile apps very long. So they try it out for a couple of seconds. If it does not do what I want to do, I take the next one. So that's pretty bad for you as a developer. You could adapt up that you say, okay, my first entry menu is really not that good. And people never get to use your awesome application in the background because they didn't understand your first screen, something like this. So, and also, the iOS app framework is designed that you have like some kind of sandboxing. So basically, one app is encapsulated and they cannot really talk to a different app. This is changed over the years, so there are ways to communicate between apps. You've probably seen that. But this is very, very limited. So you cannot just say, cannot write one app that gets the data from another app and that's taken from another app. So it's very app focused, and they're typically sandboxed in a way that they can only talk very limited to each other. So you cannot really create multiple apps that interconnect these ways. There are ways, for example, some banking apps do that to access the specific apps, but usually if you create a standard application, you cannot really go into different applications. This is data exchange. It got better over the years with the split screens, but typically they don't know if there's a different app on the environment or the ways how this works. So, for example, in a desktop environment, you could just write your data into one file on your hard drive, and another application could just load this file every time it starts up. It does not really work that well on iOS, or should not work that well. Let's say it like this. So since we're talking a lot about GUI design, since the GUI is the one thing that you will see at the beginning, it should make clear what you want to do. And you should just make sure that you create a GUI that shows exactly what the user should do, and don't have to read a manual, like 10-page manual, and your application is dead before you actually started something. So make it very easy. So for example, this this stopwatch, you just have a start button and a reset button. That's usually all you need. These things are, most of users will never use this thing. They just want to have start and reset button. Actually, there were some studies that showed, okay, it would be actually much better for Apple to have just start and reset button, and the other ones, people got confused. What is this lab means? So most of the people will never use that. So maybe have additional view if you can offer something to an expert. But make sure that as soon as your application is started, it's totally clear what the users want to do with that. Also, text is usually difficult on a mobile device, because if you think about one of the most context mobile devices used, you start reading while you're walking, or you look at the application while you're walking. And if you're walking a little bit faster, your hand starts to move. You cannot really read text very well in this case, and you can get hit by a bus because you're focused on your text. So try to minimize text. Readable, or make it really, really big, like in this case, but then you cannot present that much text. That's also something, make sure that your buttons are large enough. People try to cram in a lot of buttons in an app, but yeah, our finger has a certain size, so usually the minimal size of a button is 44 by 44 points, which is roughly 7 millimeters or something. Don't try to make it smaller. There's a reason for that, because people cannot hit this button at some point because your finger is just too fat. Also, text input is a problem for mobile devices. Usually, most of people can just enter text when they look at the phone. If you try it out, take out your phone, try to type a message under the table. If you're lucky, you're still on the same application when you're done with this, because you don't have any haptic feedback. And this is very different from desktop environment, because desktop environment can just type without looking, in most cases, if you're expert. Okay, someone who wants to come in? Can you check? Okay. No. So, no, okay, nobody there. So try to minimize text input, because text input sucks on a touchscreen, because you don't have feedback. You just can have usually 2 thumbs typing, which is very, very slow. And yeah, again, if you walk around, try to text something, you lose focus of what's happening around you. So don't create an application where the users always have to type at the beginning something. Like help them, give them shortcuts. For example, on maps, you type in the first 2 characters, you already see the useful name. So this is the way how you're supposed to do in mobile. You also do that in desktop, but in mobile, it's very, very important that you focus on these things in particular. So this is a slide that we have for several years, but I'm still sure this is true for a lot of users, not for you, but a lot of old users, that touch is still, I mean, we introduced, one was the iPhone introduced 2006, 7, yeah, whatever, so 11 years, touch is still not that easy to use for everybody. For kids, yeah, they don't know anything else than touch. So if you have if you test some with a couple of young girls, for example, my daughter is 6, and she's wondering why my laptop is not reacting to touch. So, but older people still have problem with touch, because a touchscreen is not giving you, it's a piece of glass at the end, and people are afraid of touching it because they're afraid of bringing something. So still, if you look at a lot of applications, the devices support multi-touch, but it's mostly single touch. And if you look at studies how people use multi-touch, and then you basically end up with these 4 fingers. You will never create an application where people have to do something with 5 fingers individually. You can do swipe gestures where you use multiple fingers at the same time, but then you're using your hand. But you will never have something that you have to do with the index finger to something totally different from the small finger. You can't physically, so it's not working. So if you have an idea for good gestures at some point, be careful about these things, because people will not be able to do that at some point. And this is something that Apple defines in their guidelines, saying, yeah, mostly single touch, and they have a couple of more I will show in the next slide. However, this is very, very limited in a way. And also think about if you have your mobile phone in your hand, you usually have just one finger left, which is the thumb. And from the ergonomical side of view, your thumb is not that good at moving. It can move, but compared to the other fingers, yeah, try to hit something. If you have a large phone, try to hit something at the top of the phone. It's already pretty awkward. So keep that in mind if you create an application that you mostly, when you have single hand, it's usually thumb interaction, which is not the best finger for doing these things, but that's how our hands work. And if you, as I already said, if you have complex gestures, yeah, help the users. If they have to draw a certain butterfly or something on your screen to have an awesome interaction, tell them or give them an example. So these are the standard gestures that are mostly used in iOS environments, or in touchscreen in general. You have tap, which is the obvious one, drag. Flick is already not that used. So has somebody an idea, or does somebody know where the flick gesture is used? A good way.
Any scrolling view?
Yeah, that's actually could be a flick gesture, the inverse one, yes. Yeah.
Slideshow?
Yeah, slideshow, something like this. But it's
To delete something instantly and not just revealing the delete button.
exactly. But what is the problem with this example? You have to know that. The system does not tell you that you can do that. So this is the problem of having these gestures. As an expert, you get used to that, but it's totally hidden from the users at the first place. If you have a button something, you can do any kind of operation on that, but the system will never tell you what to do. Yes?
Maybe also in Safari to go to the previous website, for example.
Yeah.
On Mac it's used for this.
Yeah. So what you have seen, these are all very, very, these are gestures, but they basically use just as the flick gesture, for example, for deleting or going back. It's just a gesture which has one state. So it can be executed, but it does not have anything to do with the direction of the swiping or the velocity. For the scrolling, yes, there's velocity involved, but it does not really involve any kind of direction. So it can go up and down, that's easy. But for example, there were some applications where you had to swipe in a certain direction, and people cannot really do that because you swipe in one direction, you cannot correct the movement of the object. And for example, throwing an object somewhere. Common interaction technique in research for a long time, or people found out, yeah, if you swipe something, defining that direction where it flies is difficult. So it's very limited, very used. Yeah, flick, swipe, it's yeah, similar to that. Then you have double tap, which is commonly known from the mouse. However, on touch it's a little bit more difficult because you really have to lift off. And then you have the two-finger interaction of pinch or pinch close and touch and hold. However, touch and hold is already a difficult thing, again, because it's a time-based interface. People have to hold for a certain time. How long is that time? People, maybe let's say it's a second or something, and people stop doing it after 0.95 seconds, nothing happens. So it's already a hidden kind of interaction. So be aware of these things. Also, 3D Touch was introduced in iOS. When was it introduced? With the iPhone 6s? So some time ago, let's say it like this. And still, if you have an iOS device and check where you can use it, it's still a function that does not really have, it's a shortcut for something that you can also do with normal touch interaction. Because it's totally unnatural to press on the glass and press heavy on the glass. Because why would you do that? You don't do that in that I will not go to the window and press harder on the window. Doesn't make any sense. So because it's a rigid body and people don't have the understanding. So it's usually for quick action, for example, for experts. Peek and pop, yeah, available. So it's exactly. And also the watch can detect it, but I'm not sure what it does on the watch.
Also additional information.
Oh, it's additional, but also only shortcuts in a way. Yeah. So this is a way how you can do the golden rule of saying having shortcuts for users by providing them, let them use specific gestures that can be, that you could achieve also doing by going through a couple of menus, but this could be some option where you can, so it's basically some something similar like a right click on with your mouse. However, this functionality is entirely hidden for someone who never used the device at the beginning. If you have a mouse, you have this button, people start automatically press this button. And yeah, if you give somebody a phone in the hand, they will never start pressing hard on the glass. That doesn't make any sense. Also, what I'm introducing a couple of functionalities here. What is out there since iOS 11 is something that also provides a couple of shortcuts. For example, if you have this control center, you can now, until iOS 11, you couldn't just, it was a fixed, was it 11 or was it 10? 11 was it introduced? Yes. Apparently.
I lost count.
Yeah. So they introduced this shortcut thing where you can actually have some kind of, create your own device, your own application, create these things, so you can swipe just up and have a certain functionality in there. So this is also a way how you can provide shortcuts or for expert users to give them more access to your applications in the way. Just skip the file app application. And as I already talked a little bit about, usually the concept of iOS devices that you have one app on your entire screen. This makes a lot of sense for mobile applications or for mobile devices like a phone or especially a watch. However, with the iPad and with the larger iPad Pro, they broke up this concept by allowing you to use split view. For example, here you can have multiple applications. I think this is the mail application, and this is the photos application. So they're trying to put the iPad Pro in the direction of the desktop applications you have shared environment. However, you cannot just do anything between these applications. So they allow you, for example, to drag images across these applications. However, both applications have to support this functionality. There are callbacks that are triggered, and if your own application doesn't support that, you cannot actually do anything with the split screen by just showing these different environments. And they're going a bit further. Now you can actually select the ratio of each application, which was in the first versions very limited to just like a 2/3 and 1/3 application. So they will push this even further in an upcoming thing. However, this only works on the iPad. Does it work on the new iPhones? Not really, doesn't it?
Not sure whether it was on the big one.
On the big ones, maybe. Would make sense, but on the small ones, doesn't really make any sense.
Okay.
So, and just to give you a quick hint, show how, if you design an application for multiple devices, you have to cover a lot of different things. So this is just an overview about the resolutions and the different sizes that you have. So the first iPhone, I put it at the top, has had this 3:2 aspect ratio and a specific resolution, but they changed it very drastically, and now you have this roughly 19 by 9. I don't know how to count this notch here, but you can actually use this as well. So if you create an application for iOS, you have to make sure that you also don't have a static interface, but you have an interface that can adapt to these different devices. Because usually you can also run your iPhone application on an iPad. And it looks a little bit different, so you have to think about these things. And this is where auto layout comes into play, my all-time favorite thing. So that's why Philipp will explain this. So there are ways to optimize your application things, but you have to be aware that you have different aspect ratios, different resolutions, and that you have the whole thing of the horizontal landscape versus portrait mode, because your application can do something entirely different when you flip the phone. So, and this is just the current versions of these things. So you see there are a lot of different things. So how could that look like? So for example, how could you take an application and change it depending on the size on this thing? So this is the example of the mail application. This is my inbox. This is how it looks like on the desktop. So you have these folders, and you have your emails, and then you have your contacts. This, if you would use it on a phone, it looks like this. These are 3 different views. So the first one is basically you don't have any folders here. I'm just one level inside here, but you have just one view of your emails. Then you can click on one mail, then you have the contacts inside these mails. and then you can edit these maps. So you really have to, for everything that you do, you create your own new view, or you have a specific view. This has the benefit that you can actually say, okay, I have the whole screen space for showing everything, the content. However, if you're here and you want to switch to a different mailbox, you have to go back to here, and then back to here again. So the interaction is way longer from the conceptual wise, because with the mouse interface, if we go back, let's go back. Here you could just say, okay, I want to have a different folder. My mouse is here, and I'm just moving here, click this. So this is way faster, because the mouse is in generally faster than touch and more precise. And people will take longer, because the screen that does a lot of animation stuff and then update these things, so it will take longer. On the iPad, it looks different, because the iPad has a little bit more screen space. And what they did is basically display, have two views at the same time. So you have your mails, and you have your context mails. And if you change this around, you have, if you flip to the portrait mode, then you have this context as well. However, this is just a hover. So if you click on this thing, it will fade away after some time. So you have to be, if you have create your applications for multiple devices, you have to be creative about these things. And you have to decide what should users see on which kind of devices, which makes it a little bit more difficult depending on the application. I want to skip this one. Also, an important thing, as I already said, people decide very, very quickly if they want to use your application, or if they just use one of the trillion other versions that are out there. And that's why if you create an application, it should start very, very quickly. So people don't want to, I'm starting my application and I go to the login screen. The typical start your Illustrator on your MacBook or on your Windows PC. You can get a coffee or something in between. And people accept this for desktop environments because they know, okay, a lot of stuff is going on there. On mobile, not so much, because they want to have access as fast. And usually what a lot of applications are doing, they don't show a loading screen, but they show a screenshot of your application. So this is basically not a working system here. This is the first thing you see. You start the stock application. It's an empty form, but it's just a screenshot. Cannot interact with something, but people have the feeling, okay, something happened. Yeah, there will be something, it's just loading. But it shows these things. And also make sure if you have an application that loads, make it as fast as loadable possible. Maybe if you have a game, load the menu at the first thing, because you know people are in the menu the rest while they're navigating through the menu. So it's a key concept that you are as fast as possible, because if you walk around and you want to check for the bus and your bus application needs a minute to load, yeah, your bus is gone. Yeah. Exactly. So also, as I talked a little bit about this, is you have to be aware that your application can be stopped or killed anytime. Whatever you do, something could happen. And usually, also these applications do not really have a close button. They usually have, in the old iOS devices, you have the home button, and the other ones you have the swipe gesture to get rid of it. But that's something people can just switch between applications, but it's more commonly that something happens. For example, somebody calls you, and the application is going back to an instant and then never return. You have this, if you're an iOS user, you know that you have, for example, if you're in your mail application, you get an incoming call, you can have this go back functionality, go back to your application, but a lot of people don't do that because it's a tiny button at the top. So be aware that your application can be stopped in an instant. Also different from desktop environments, because in desktop you can have your Word open and you open a browser and they can be active at the same time. It's really not important, just the window on top of each other. But it doesn't affect the Word application if the browser is on top, because the Word applications just don't do anything. However, in iOS, in mobile environments, usually what happens if your application goes to background, it either stops entirely working or it goes to kind of a sleeping state to not drain your battery. There are certain stages, we will talk about these different stages of applications, and the life cycle of applications is one of the topics that we're going to talk about. These states offer, for example, you can have notifications at some point, but you cannot really use the GPU at that time very dramatically, because why should you? I mean, It's in the background, and if you at some point, for example, if you would allow this and you have 20 applications in the background running, and all of them doing something on your GPU, your battery will be gone in a minute. So that's why they do a lot of energy saving, and they say, okay, if you're in the background, you can do something, but not that much. So be aware of these things. So at the end, I want to talk a little bit about different styles of applications. Usually, you can divide applications for mobile into these 3 categories, roughly. So the first one is productivity, then you have utility, and then you have immersive things. Productivity could be organizing informations like the photos, having a calendar. So having one particular option may do a lot of input that way. Create a calendar event, create an email thing, add a list, go shopping list or stuff like these things. Typical examples are contacts, photos, and everything. So these are typical productivity applications where you have like a couple of views and you can interact with them by creating content. The utility app is a little bit different. They are really usually the smallest applications out there. They have just one tiny functionality, which is very, very focused on one thing. The maps one is one of the best examples. It doesn't really allow you to do anything else than, show me the weather, and you can actually choose at which location you want to have a weather, and you can add favorites to your location. So this is basically a couple of views, but it does not do a lot. So, and the interaction with this is very limited. So basically, for most people, if you open the weather app, you just open the weather app, look at the weather, and close the app. You don't do any touch interaction with the app at all in most cases, if you just want to check your weather. Otherwise, you do one swipe gesture maybe, or one scroll gesture, but not that. So weather and stocks is the typical ones. They just show you information. They don't give you any detail, or they don't allow you to do anything particular. These are some examples: the weather app, the stocks app, and this is an interesting application. I'm not sure if it's still available. Do you know that? It's an Elements. The Elements should be. It was a very good one. It was an iPad application where you can actually see, it's for chemistry people, where you see all the elements and you get a lot of information about each of these elements. But it doesn't really give you a lot of information, but it has just the element table. You could just click on one element and then you get a lot of information. I have no idea what this graphics is doing because I haven't, but it shows you some information about the molecules in this part. And the third category is the immersive applications. And these are usually the ones that do not really follow the concepts of the entire interface. The interfaces for these things look very different because they're using full screen environments, have custom buttons, custom UI. And these are mostly focused on user experience, like showing you the world or showing games is one of the biggest parts in there. Are games, AR environments are also not very custom, are not very the standard iOS application that you see, but it gives you like a full screen and immersive environment. One of the early examples were the Living Earth, so it's basically Google Earth, so it just shows you Earth. And this is one of the earliest applications in iOS. I think it was released during the first release ever. It's just so you get like a what's Wasserwaage? Yeah, so it just gives you a level, uses the compass information and the IMU inside the phone to give you exactly this functionality. And it was designed, as maybe you see in the old iOS designs, they were more like with real physical buttons, not that flat design that we now have. But it was like, and that's why they designed this. And as I said, the most typical in this applications in this task, in this environment were games. I mean, games are the most used applications on iOS or on mobile devices in any ways, and there are a lot of things. There's this Tiny Wings, which is pretty old, which is a couple of years old. There's Super Mario, and these are the new upcoming AR kits. If you've seen, when was it presented last year, I think, on WWDC? The machines? The machines, yes. Yeah, it was last year. They had an update. So it's an augmented reality app where you can play using augmented reality and have a lot of these things. You can actually download this. So these are the most let's say, interesting applications because you have to design everything for yourself. So you create your own interface. You don't display any information, but you actually try to immerse the users into this game environment or into these things. Okay, I want to skip these things because we will do it in the next lecture. So that's basically it for today. I wanted to give you a quick overview of these things. Mobile versus desktop. And yeah, keep the hardware restrictions in mind. Applications, I already talked about this. So if you are interested in this and you want to follow up this course, I encourage you to read this thing. I will put that on, we will also put that online. That's the Human Interface Guidelines. There are a couple of things which give you an overview how Apple tells you to design an application. However, this is just true for the utility and for the productivity games, but they tell you how large should be button sizes, what should be distances between these things, how large should the table should look like, what kind of interactions. So there's a gigantic guideline about from Apple that tells you, okay, if you create this standard application, how should it behave, how should it lay. And this is actually really important because you want to have a consistent environment. Because people don't want to learn in every application which do similar things. Yeah, for example, if you say, oh, in this application, you have to swipe to the side to go up and down. It doesn't make any sense. So if you create an application that follows these productivity utilities, you should be following the guidelines, which are quite accessible. Just have a quick load through it, and they give you a good start to develop these things. So what's next? So next thing is register in RWTH Online until tomorrow, because as you can see, we are more than 36 people in this room, and we have currently 80 or 90 registrations, and we have to choose from that. How we choose, I set RWTH Online to make it random. I don't know what it does. Let's figure that out. Otherwise, we will do it randomly, so we will not select anyone in favor of this because it's not a mandatory course for nobody. So we want to have a good mix of everybody. We want a couple of SSE masters, so we will do totally random for you. So we will, otherwise it's unfair. You will get notified if you're in by the end of the week. I hope, hopefully on Thursday. We'll go through that. And the next lecture is not happening next week because Philipp and I are not here next week. So the next lecture is actually on the Monday after that week, so in 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks. Yeah, and what we'll do now, this time we will start, first of all, introducing the seminar topics, and then you can select your groups, and you can get your seminar topics, and then we will start diving into Swift and do your first applications and show you how to create your first applications. Okay, if you have any questions, Philipp and I will be here. Yeah, if you have problems with register, come to me, and then we will see you hopefully, or we will notify you. Still, I'm not sure how. Maybe I will send everybody of you an email if this RWTH Online doesn't work, but we will notify you by the end of the week if you have a slot or not. All right, thank you.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.